spoke recently at the J Street conference, and you had mentioned, you criticized Prime Minister Netanyahu for his opposition to the Iran deal and for bringing that opposition before Congress, but you said we need to stay within the accord. But you had voted against the accord. So I want to understand what is your position on the Iran deal these days?
First, I spoke at both J Street and APAC, so let me make that clear. Our objective, good morning everyone, it's good to be here. Our objective, thank you for all you do in supporting the U.S.-Israel relations. 70 years is remarkable. Two countries that share the same values. The relationship extremely important to Israel and the United States. Our objective, quite simply, is to contain and eliminate the threat of Iran. Iran's threat is not just its nuclear weapons, it's what they do in support of terrorism, what they're doing in ballistic missiles, what they do in human rights violations, what they do in arms issues. So our objective is to concentrate on what is happening in Iran. We should be taking much stronger actions against Iran on the non-nuclear violations and what they're doing on ballistic missiles and what they're doing on terrorism, the threat in Syria of giving Iran a foothold on the Israeli border. All that should be actions, and the Congress has passed additional sanctions that can be imposed, and we need to work with the international community to isolate Iran. My concern is that if the United States pulls out of the Iran agreement, while they're in compliance, we isolate the United States rather than isolating Iran. Iran has made a commitment never to have a nuclear weapon, and the United States must work with our allies to make sure that's a reality. There are a lot of things we can do within the agreement, there are things we can do to enforce the agreement, and there's a lot of things we can do to build on the agreement.
So when we talk about fix it or nix it, as Prime Minister Netanyahu has said about the Iran deal, you're for fixing it?
I'm for making sure Iran complies with it. That means never, ever having a nuclear weapon. And there are ambiguities on the post-sunset periods. So we have a right to talk about how do we deal with Iran after the limitations are removed. That's years from now, but we should be talking about that now. I'm for making sure Iran never has a nuclear weapon, but I don't want to see us isolate the United States from our allies as it relates to Iran.
So currently, Iran is sort of building its strength on Israel's northern border in Syria. What kind of things can the U.S. do, or should the U.S. be doing, to help Israel defend itself on its northern border?
I'm extremely concerned about that. In Syria, we have two campaigns, one against ISIS, which is moving in the right direction. The other is the civil war, where Assad's lost all credibility of leading his people. We have to make sure that the resolution of that civil war does not give, through Russia, a foothold of Iran on Israel's northern border. That's of great concern. So the United States needs to have Israel's back to make sure that doesn't happen. That's why the United States needs to be engaged on how this civil war ends in Syria.
So do you think that the United States should be taking a more active role than it is right now?
I don't think we've been effective in what's happening in Syria in the civil war. I don't think there's a military answer for the United States, but I do think that Assad should end up at The Hague and be held accountable for his war crimes, and the United States needs to be there to make sure the final resolution doesn't give Iran a foothold in Syria.
At the moment, it seems like any international efforts on the diplomatic level to deal with Syria are just thwarted by the Russian veto in the UN Security Council. So where and with whom do you think the U.S. should be working?
Well, first of all, our complaint against the Russian regime is against Mr. Putin and its leadership. It's not against the Russian people. But the Congress, by 99% vote, gave President Trump more mandatory sanctions against Russia, in part for what they're doing in Syria. So let's make Russia pay a price for how they're handling the Syria issue. And there's a lot more we can do in regards to trying to influence how Russia's behaving and Iran's behaving in Syria.
And do you think Israel needs to be worried about increased Russian influence in the Middle East?
I think we should be worried about increased Russia influence globally, including in the United States. Here you have a country, Russia, the economy is smaller than Italy's economy, smaller than South Korea's economy, and they're trying to deal with world dominance on their philosophy. They're trying to bring down democratic institutions around the world, get a foothold in the Middle East. Yes, we should be very concerned about Russia's objective, because their objective is to compromise our democratic way of life, and that should be of concern to all Americans.
On to a different part of the Middle East, into Israel itself. Next month, the U.S. Embassy will officially be moving to Jerusalem. This was a very popular decision in Israel.
Looks like it's popular here also.
Yes, definitely. Do you think the president made the right choice here?
Congress, many years ago, approved the decision made by the government of Israel that its capital is Jerusalem. Every country determines its own capital. What's the big news here? It's not big news. We've recognized it. So I don't see this as a major decision by the President of the United States. Now, having said this, hold it. Give me a chance here.
Let's show the senator some respect.
Let me say let me finish this. The capital of Israel is Jerusalem. The manner in which the president handled it, in my view, was a missed opportunity. But Israel's capital is Jerusalem, and we've all recognized that, and we will continue to recognize that.
Now, when it comes to the peace process, there's some sort of, behind the scenes trying to come up with some sort of framework, but the Palestinians refuse to speak with the current administration. Do you think that there's any real progress happening on that front?
Look, we have to always move towards peace in the Middle East, everything we can. The objective is two states living side by side in peace, a Jewish state, a Palestinian state. The climate for that happening it's not going to happen in the short term. We've seen over and over again opportunities for peace, and I was part of some of those efforts, in which the Palestinian leaders would not take advantage of those opportunities. We know that. But we have to keep the process alive. And we'll look for an opportunity when we have the leadership that will move the Palestinians and the Israelis to peace. And we will reinforce that. The United States needs to play an important role to facilitate that. One thing that I have said from the beginning, the only way there will be peace between the Palestinians and Israelis is direct negotiations between the Palestinians and Israelis. No third party is going to force peace in that region.
Now, back in the U.S., a lot of states are passing laws to outlaw boycotts of Israel. Usually the text of the law is broader, that you can't boycott allies of the U.S., but the intention is Israel. There's been some criticism, including from some pro-Israel people, that it's a freedom of speech issue. Where do you fall on this?
Well, first, let me put this in context. There's a growing nationalism globally, which brings about a rise of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. And the BDS movement is part of that effort to delegitimate the state of Israel. 40 years ago, we passed the anti-Arab boycott bill, where the Arab nations try to use their economic strength to isolate Israel, ultimately to destroy Israel through its economy. The United States Congress spoke up and passed the anti-Arab boycott law. That's against states having boycotts against Israel. In recent years, we've seen the United Nations Human Rights Council initiate a blacklist against companies that do business with Israel. This is a real threat. The 40-year-old law does not apply to that. So Senator Portman and I, Democrat and Republican, have introduced legislation that will expand the anti-boycott laws to international institutions such as the United Nations Human Rights Council. It's pure and simple. It's all it does. Doesn't do anything else. Doesn't impede speech. It's been held up by the courts as constitutional. It is to prevent the Human Rights Council from intimidating American companies. It protects American companies, and we got to pass this because letters are already being sent to companies asking whether they're doing business with Israel. So I've been working very closely with the leadership in the Senate to get this done, and I think we're on path. We've worked out some of the issues some members had, and I thank a lot of people who have joined us in getting this legislation passed.
I want to go back to something you said at the beginning of this answer. You said that there's increased nationalism around the world, and that contributes to anti-Semitism. Now, there's no denying that, but specifically on the boycott issue, it seems to be coming from the other end of the spectrum, not from the growing nationalism, but from the radical left. As a Democrat, do you see something that could be done to sort of counter those kinds of trends in the party? Certainly we saw in the last primary that the sort of radical end of the party has become more popular.
So the last vote we had, which I think is about a year or two ago, on legislation that Senator Portman and I introduced in the Finance Committee that requires our trade representative to negotiate anti-BDS provisions in trade agreements. It passed by a unanimous vote in the Finance Committee and a unanimous vote on the floor of the United States Senate. So I haven't seen that division in our political system with our representatives as far as voting on the BDS movement. So I just want that to be clear. We have been able to maintain that. I've worked very closely on this particular bill, and I believe we have the support, broad support, to get this bill passed in the United States Senate. We are hoping it will be discharged from the committee, which means we can work on a unanimous consent request again on this. So we are dealing with the political support. Look, I understand that there may be differences of view on the left and right. There may be differences of view in regards to the personality of a particular leader or a particular issue. The support for the U.S.-Israel relations has survived these partisan attacks. And the broad knowledge of the American people understand the importance of this relationship. That's why $3.1 billion was appropriated basically without any controversy in the Memorandum of Understanding between the United States and Israel. That's why we have that cooperation on missile defense, on Iron Dome and David Sling, and the tunnel cooperation between our countries. We have broad support, Democrats, Republicans, House, Senate, Congress, White House. And it's incumbent upon all of us to make sure that broad understanding continues in the United States of America. And that's what I'm going to be doing as United States Senator to make sure Israel does not become a wedge partisan issue.
Are you concerned, though? Do you see Israel starting to become a wedge partisan issue, as you called it?
I have seen I've seen individuals. Yes, it concerns me. It concerns me both sides. So yes, I am concerned about that because of my commitment to do everything I can to strengthen the ties between the United States and Israel. I don't think it's in the interest of that relationship to try to be partisan for the sake of partisanship as it relates to Israel.
All right, our time is up. Thank you very much, Senator.
Thank you all.